I want to give you an idea how I use AI. The news stories the other day talked about how the United States military was threatening to bomb Oman, one of our allies, and giving orders coming from the commander-in-chief to not support the South Korean military exercises because the president had spoken to Kim Jong-un and had talked about the friendship that they had and how we need to be scaling back because we've come a long way and we don't need to be. And South Korea didn't support our military efforts in Iran and continue to refuse to. So there's no really allied relationship for us to talk about. At least that was the impression we got from the news. Or at least the news I was looking at, which is usually 4 or 5 different sources. So I go to Google AI, and I asked this question. I am mystified that we threatened to bomb Oman and Kim is deciding American military decisions. The president said he talked to Kim, talked about their friendship. The implication from the news I saw assured him that we would not be involved in working with our ally, their fiercest and most permanent enemy. Simultaneously, Trump announced, this is from my AI, simultaneously Trump announced a sudden order to substantially reduce joint military exercises with South Korea, explicitly referencing his relationship with North Korea leader Kim Jong-un. And I went through this and I asked the question if Colin Powell or Walter Boomer were involved in the conversation, how might they respond to such a remark and any order to fall regarding to the Oman threat to bomb the shit out of them if they get in the way. They gave me an answer, and it went on and it talked, and then it talked about, what Boomer would say and what Powell would say, and the Powell doctrine, and the pragmatic focus that Walter Boomer always had on troops, logistics, and battlefield realities. And they would certainly follow the orders. I asked the question about, is there, in each case, Oman and South Korea, does the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense have possible sway to avoid further tension? Any possibilities they would try? And they gave me an answer, and it talked about it. And as you notice, I'm not actually telling you all of the details here of what it said, because I came to a point where I asked, are you giving me information to substantiate a specific position on purpose? Are you looking for data to prove a point? I said, I need a stoic, apolitical, and practical analysis. And this is the problem with artificial intelligence. It's just like that guy who was the first story I told in the book I wrote in 2009, Absolutely Vulnerable. The guy whose job it was to find where they need to move the new corporate headquarters. And after telling me of all the things he talked about, quality of life and educational opportunities and cost of living and tax incentives and everything else, went through this whole thing. And I said, man, that's really hard. And he said, no, I just need to find out where the chief chairman wants to live. I just need to find out where the CEO wants to live and then justify it. And a lot of what artificial AI has done through this whole thing, through all of my questioning, was to glean something from how I asked questions to bring me answers that it presumes I wanted. And it said, you're entirely correct to call that out. From here, I'll read to you what AI had to say. Analyzing immediate breaking news events naturally introduces the hazard of leaning into narrative tracking rather than objective mechanics. To strip down apolitical and practical logic, the situation is driven entirely by a finite equation of military math, tactical leverage, and structural resources. When looked at purely through a Stoic lens, here is the mechanical reality of why these events are happening and why the cabinet operates the way it does. The resource formula, why South Korea exercises are scaling back. The reduction of South Korean military drills is primarily a symptom of structural resource depletion, irrespective of the political narrative framing it as a favor to Kim Jong-un. The U.S. military cannot fight a high-tempo war and maintain peak readiness deterrence globally at the same time. The ongoing conflict with Iran requires an immediate and immense amount of air defense, surveillance, and naval support. The logistics deficit. The U.S. has already physically removed THAAD and Patriot missile defense batteries from the Indo-Pacific theater to deploy them in the Middle East. You cannot run massive complex joint drills like Ulchi Freedom Shield at 100% capacity if the exact equipment, personnel, and carrier strike groups needed to simulate those battles have been rerouted to the Persian Gulf. The reduction of drills is a logistical reality forced by a shortage of available hardware and arms stockpiles. The executive branch is using political framing, the rapport with Kim Jong-un, to justify a retreat and readiness that was already happening due to resource constraints. The leverage play, why Oman is being threatened. The hardline stance on Oman is an attempt to preserve a closing window of tactical leverage over Iran, completely distinct from any personal emotional outburst. Strategic bottleneck. The U.S. strategy relies entirely on maintaining a strict economic and maritime blockade on Iran via the Strait of Hormuz. The vulnerability. Oman shares control of that strait. If Oman formalizes a separate maritime framework, the independent transit routes, or a tolling system with Tehran, the U.S. blockade springs a leak. It gives Iran an economic and diplomatic release valve. To keep the blockade airtight, the administration must ensure Oman does not cooperate with Iran. The verbal threat of force is a blunt instrument to use to reset boundaries with a smaller state, signaling that the U.S. views independent mediation as a threat to its active wartime objectives. The structural role of Rubio and Hegseth. In a practical analysis, cabinet secretaries are not independent actors. They function exactly as the system requires them based on how they were selected. It goes on to the selection mechanism. Unlike Trump's first term, which featured traditional institutionalist generals, Madison Kelly, who actively tried to slow walk or block unconventional presidential commands, this cabinet was selected explicitly for ideological and operational alignment. There's going to be no bureaucratic friction from Hegseth or Rubio. Hegseth's job is to manage a military that is running low on bandwidth. He has no practical reason to fight a full-scale Korean exercises because his current task is managing the escalation of the Middle East. Rubio's job is to structurally enforce the administration's America First posture by telling allies they must align with U.S. goals or face withdrawal of support. Now, if we strip away the core takeaways, stripped away of all political spin, the U.S. is facing a classic geopolitical calculation. When you choose to engage heavily in one theater, the Middle East, you are forced to make concessions or accept higher risk in another, East Asia. The threats to Oman and the pullbacks in the threats to Oman and the pullbacks in South Korea are simply the friction points of an empire managing limited resources under the weight of an active war. The threats of Oman and the pullbacks of South Korea are simply the friction points of an empire managing limited resources under the weight of an active war. To further test this apolitical framework, it would be helpful to further test this in an apolitical framework. We could examine the specific status of the U.S. Navy assets currently available globally, or we could look at the economic impact of the Strait of Hormuz blockade on global energy supply. We could take this a couple of different ways, but we need to understand that on the surface, the noise and the news is being made for reasons the news may not be able or capable or qualified to report. They're giving you the facts, they're telling you the people, they are inferring from those facts and people without doing the necessary research to neutralize the political danger and to stay focused on what really matters. This laid out on the table, yes, we probably shouldn't be in South Korea. Yes, we probably should be preserving resources. Yes, we should be looking at who was it who endorsed and improved and had the opportunity to stop this happening because of the amateurs who are in charge at the Defense Department. There was a meme that was produced early in the Iran war. And it was a picture that showed 3 rows of all of the generals and senior military advisors who were removed to make the Iran war possible. And under the picture of each of these generals that couldn't do enough pull-ups or enough sit-ups was the words regime change. Meaning, America has had a regime change. Iran made it happen.
I've seen this moment coming for more than a decade. In 2020, I warned the people in charge. By 2023, I took Mark Twain's advice. I won't have this conversation with fools. Socrates taught me to aim higher, past people and events, into ideas. On Friday the 13th of March, the VP of editorial pulled the plug on my book launch. Too much to do. Too little time for June. The risk was real. So I pivoted. Today, through the Thomas Padlan-Malm Hour, I'm starting the longer game toward a 2028 launch. The book, A Voter's Audit, was born at a post office window from 2014 to 2025. Most of us live in the first 3 steps of thinking. Remember, understand, apply. Fewer analyze. Fewer still evaluate. Almost none create. Memory, understanding, application. Analyze, evaluate, create. I grew up reading a civics book before lights out. It said something like this: we were built for 435 separate conversations aimed at the common good. If we restore that, we can do 2 things. Invent working capitalism that rewards better ideas. Define the government's role so peace holds and talent leads. The conditions are hard. Debt heavy, trust thin, power shifting, costs rising. But the path is clear. Think better, ask better, build better. A voter's audit begins now.
When I was running camps and clinics and running ice hockey programs, I had the good fortune of a Russian Olympian to help me as my power skating coach for clinics and that sort of thing. You know, Russian born and trained, came up through the system there, and he represented Uzbekistan. In my clinic, my Russian disciplined and coached instructor had this really high tempo drill that he seemed to use just for sort of gathering data, seeing who he was working with and what they needed. And it sort of guided him one drill to the next, to his next point of focus. And he started one by one. He had the skaters skate in these circles, which we always do. And as he did, you know, you could hear this, you know, you've got these skaters all there out trying to impress this guy. And one by one, they leap to their start, and the power of the metal edges of their blades and below their boots, they're chopping up the ice and they're feet are pumping like crazy, and there's a wake of snow and a big blow up at the very end when they make that stop and throw a big wave of snow up against the boards. And when the drill was over and all the men standing on the line, he said to them, "You must be silent." Now, I'm sure I don't get the words exactly right because this is, practically 20 years ago. But he said, if you're making noise when your stride hits that ice, that's energy being used to make noise that's no use to anyone. But if you are focused on using your power to your best advantage, you will be silent and you will guide every stride so that it grips the ice firmly without friction making noises. And you put all of that energy into your stride, you'll get somewhere, you'll get there faster, and you will arrive less tired. And I talked to you before about that conversation I had with the people at the bar that were trying to figure out in 2018 who they were going to vote for. And when I told the story the first time, I forgot the real gist of it. The real thing that I talked about, there were two parts. There was just about everything that I'm talking about here in the voters audit. Just about all of it were questions that were part of the conversation that we had then. And I know that they were good questions because when I went into the same restaurant a few days later, the bartender said, "Oh, you should have been here last night, man. Those guys you were talking to last Thursday or Wednesday or whenever it was, they were here last night and they were talking about you and about all the stuff that you were talking about." And it really came down to this one story about and I use this story a lot, about the bird that used to live in the tree, this cardinal that used to live in the tree behind my house in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. And it would sit there all day, and when the sun came up, it would see its reflection and fly into the glass to defend its territory. Pure Robert Audrey territorial imperative. I see that bird there is a threat to me, and I'm going to make sure that bird that I see in the reflection in the glass looks real to the bird. He's going to fly in there 6, 8, 10 times a day, talons out, beak out, aggressive, crash, flies back, wondering what the heck. Forgets about it, I guess. Sees that bird again, flies and crash all day long. And the bird does this, it's his imperative to protect his territory. And he sees that threat there, that big, bold red cardinal looks as good and strong as him, and he needs to make sure it doesn't stick around, and it flies into it all day long. And that's the fight they have. And the bird doesn't realize that what he's flying into is exactly himself, just perfectly opposite. And that defines the Republican and the Democratic parties to me. About my website today, which is found at the thomaspadlanmalmhour.com or tp-mhour.online. And that'll take you right here, where when we look at the management of America and the right to elect our peers, it is worth asking if we have been. It is worth exploring where we are, what we have become, and what we might be. How many people do you know can sit back and take a look at something like that? It's work to be done 435 times in 435 U.S. congressional districts. And the question asks, who do you know to embrace this idea where you live? There's a thing that I always made sure that I did, and that was make sure that my game was in control and to make sure that the only time I'm making demands beyond what we have rehearsed over and over and over again, and it's, you talk about ice hockey, it's such a game of chaos, so it's a read and react game. You can't, no. If you know where you're going to go, you know what you're trying to do. When things go wrong, everybody knows what went wrong, and everybody understands how it needs to be addressed. But that comes from practice, over and over and over again. And you can run a whole game, just throw people on the ice, not give them instruction, not give them games, and they're going to go through a game like this one here. You'll see this is Lafayette College when I coached them in our final game of my first season against the University of Pennsylvania. And here we are. There's 20 minutes to go in the game, which means we're about ready to drop the puck. We have 15 shots on goal. Our opponent has 29 shots on goal. We have 3 goals. Our opponent has 5. And I brought the guys together between periods and said, here's what's going to happen in the next 5 or 6 minutes. And as you'll see, with 6 minutes and 17 seconds to go, there's 26 shots on goal versus 35, meaning they got 6 shots and we've got 14. They're in the penalty box now with almost 2 minutes to go because all of a sudden things aren't going the way they expected to. And we have 9 goals from 3. So in basically 13 minutes, we scored 6 goals. 6 goals, and we scored 9 total from 6 different skaters. Now, if I held this meeting at the beginning of the game, we would have had 9-6 after the first period, and there's a pretty good opportunity for us to have lost the game badly because of the way the brains work. The old axiom in the sport is give a young team a big lead early, and that's the worst thing you could have because they're not going to listen to you anymore. You need to know when to talk. You need to know what it's going to require to be successful. You need to communicate that, and when success comes, it didn't happen because we just did the same behavior harder. It happened because we moved people around, we changed roles, we explained things that might not have, that the other team was doing that might be able to be taken advantage of. And we controlled the game as long as we needed to go home the decisive winner. And it's because I knew that I couldn't ask them to do something before it was time. I want to talk a little bit about a musician who, back when I was in that industry, I gave some support to. And when I met him, he had just pretty much a year or two before arrived in Nashville. He had just been touring with Dolly Parton and had discovered a pedal that and the company that I worked for was importing from Germany. And if I got every session player in America playing on through my box, my pedal, it creates something that everyone has to have in order to sound like that. And the reason I'm thinking about Tom a lot is during COVID, he started a series of videos. These conversations that are had are not conversations that everybody can have. They're not conversations where everybody has something meaningful to contribute.
You know the old blues turnaround? The step 1, right? That's 101.
Yeah.
102 is 103. This is where it starts getting good. Is
Yeah.
You got the dominant 7 in the bass,
Yeah.
with the 5 and the 3 on top.
Yeah.
But here's where Uncle Larry takes it.
Okay. Nice.
See ya. You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing.
That's
It starts.
beautiful.
It starts sounding expensive.
It's very expensive. You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing.
Now, of course, I want to be eminently clear that I didn't talk to Rick Beato about using his video. I didn't talk to Tom about using him as an example. What they have and what they've created, Tom has his series where he basically does homeschool and kind of the way I'm doing the Thomas Padlan-Malm Hour. Then he has other programs focused on a specific audience, very specific topics, very specific problems to resolve. We can take a look at the facts, the reality. I mean, I take a look at demographics. I take a look at the changes. I take a look at the troubles around the world and our welcoming spirit that the Statue of Liberty proclaims. But the one question that I have to ask is, of all of the people who have been opposed to the president's birthright citizenship executive order, how many have actually read it? How many actually absorbed what its intention was? Because when I saw it, and I saw how we are changing, and I contemplated how that might be as we look forward from all of the evidence and information at hand, something ought to be done. But it can't be done the way it was attempted. And that is the issue. That's that fine critical difference between how democracy appears in places where you elect your leader and then you re-elect or elect a new leader. But when you do elect that leader, they have unilateral control over just about everything. They can change the laws as they see fit. They can function and behave however they want to. And for the population that's growing, for the immigrant population that's arriving, the behaviors that the president is attempting through executive order, and he's not the first to ever do it. I mean, every president since Kennedy in my lifetime has overstepped their power. But in this particular case, we're making fundamental constitutional changes via executive order. And that's my objection. But I would recommend reading what the intention of the executive order is against all of the information.
Today, we're going to dive into the differences between cable and streaming media news content and what it means to have an FCC license. You know that phrase, the revolution will not be televised? Well, it's got me thinking about how we consume news and information these days. It's wild how much has changed since that phrase first hit the scene. We're living in this digital age where information is everywhere, but sometimes it feels like we're drowning in it, right? So I wanted to take a deep dive into this whole concept and explore how cable and streaming media news content differ and the role of the FCC in all this. Alright, let's kick things off by talking about this concept called the Fourth Estate. It's a pretty dope idea that basically says journalism is like this unofficial fourth branch of government. It's crazy when you think about it, right? Journalism has been around for centuries, and it's always been this crucial part of how societies function. The fourth estate is all about keeping the other three branches of government in check. It's like having a watchdog that's always on alert, making sure the people in power don't get too comfortable. And that's super important for democracy. Without journalism, it'd be way too easy for corruption to run wild. Now let's talk about something that's honestly kind of scary when you really think about it, how media shapes what we think. It's wild, right? Like, we all like to think we're independent thinkers, but the truth is, the media we consume has a huge impact on our opinions and beliefs, and when it comes to revolutions and social movements, that influence is cranked up to 11. Think about it. The way a protest is covered can totally change how people perceive it. If the news focuses on violence, even if it's just a small part of what's happening, that becomes the whole story for a lot of people. But if they show the peaceful majority and explain the reasons behind the protest, it's a whole different vibe. Okay, so we've talked about journalism as this big, abstract concept, but let's get into the nitty-gritty of what makes it so important. Its role as a watchdog. This is where journalism really flexes its muscles, you know? It's all about holding the powerful accountable, whether that's the government, big corporations, or anyone else who might be abusing their position. Think about some of the biggest scandals in history: Watergate, the Panama Papers, Edward Snowden's revelations. None of that would have come to light without brave journalists and their sources. And it's not just about the big flashy stories either. Local journalism plays a huge role in keeping your city council, your school board, all those local power players honest. It's like having a neighborhood watch, but for democracy. Alright, now let's get into something I'm really excited about. How technology is completely changing the game when it comes to news and information. It's like we've gone from horse and buggy to Hyperloop in the span of a couple decades. Now, we've got news at our fingertips 24/7. It's instant, it's constant, and it's coming from everywhere. Social media, news apps, podcasts, YouTube channels, the options are endless. And it's not just about speed. The way we consume news has totally changed. We're not just passive readers or viewers anymore. And let's talk about personalization for a second. Algorithms are getting scary good at figuring out what kind of news we want to see. So we've got all this information at our fingertips, but here's the million-dollar question. Who do we trust? It's like we're living in this age of information overload, but also this age of skepticism. And honestly, it's kind of a mess. On one hand, it's good that people aren't just blindly believing everything they read, but on the flip side, when people start doubting everything, that's a problem too. We're seeing this crazy situation where people will dismiss solid fact-checked reporting as fake news, but then turn around and believe some random conspiracy theory they saw on social media. It's not just about individuals either. There's this growing distrust of institutions in general, including the media. Some of that is deserved. There have been plenty of cases of media outlets getting things wrong or showing bias. But when that distrust goes too far, it can be really dangerous for democracy. Alright, so we've talked about all these challenges with media and information, but here's the thing. We're not helpless in all this. We've got a secret weapon, and it's called media literacy. Think of it like a survival kit for the digital age. It's all about developing the skills to navigate this crazy information landscape we're living in. And let me tell you, these skills are crucial. We're talking about things like being able to spot fake news, understanding how algorithms affect what we see online, recognizing bias in reporting, all that good stuff. It's like learning to read between the lines, but for the 21st century. And the cool thing is, anyone can develop these skills. It's not about being super tech savvy or having a journalism degree. It's about asking the right questions and being aware of how media works. Like, when you see a news story, do you think about who's behind it? What their motivations might be? Do you cross-check information with others?
When I coached ice hockey, it was interesting because I always made sure that anything we talked about, anything that was instructional, never was longer than 7 minutes. I was always careful to use language that didn't require heavy cognitive lifting. And it's because your brain weighs, a couple pounds, but it absorbs 20% of all of your energy. So try to imagine this the kinds of problems that we're going to be solving as we contemplate the topics and discussions that we need to have, we need to know that a lot of folks are going to be offering their opinions, and they're generally going to be driven from fear, because that is our evolved natural reaction to everything. We spend our nights sleeping, have 4 to 7 dreams each night, and 80% of the time we're dreaming, we are defending ourselves in order to help prepare ourselves for when we see things that are odd to us in the day, to protect ourselves. And it's a natural reaction, unless you're the kind of person, one of those, we'll just call it 7% of us, who when they see stuff, they say, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? Abstract thinking is to look at the United States Postal Service and to look at all of the work that I have done over the last 6 years, trying to make sure that we didn't end up where we are. And understanding that the people with the greatest stakes, the American citizens with the greatest stake in the United States Postal Service for its economy, are our now 3rd largest minority, that always had been our 2nd. Now that information creates another conversation that needs to be had regarding what do we really need to do about immigration, especially when we understand that without immigration, our agriculture is going to be more expensive, our building will slow down, and our growth and expansion of the economy that depends on low-wage labor, the factories that we're talking about reestablishing and bringing back to America, need employees that will work at them.
The classification of America's demographic landscape has fundamentally shifted due to varying rates of net immigration and birth differentials. The shift in rankings. For decades, Black or African American citizens constituted the largest racial ethnic minority group in the U.S. By the early 2000s, the Hispanic or Latino population surpassed the non-Hispanic Black population in size. Today, the U.S. Census Bureau tracks the Hispanic or Latino population at approximately 20.5%, while the Black or African American alone population sits at 13.5%. The concept of dilution. In purely mathematical terms, the historic black-white binary of American social and political discourse has been decentralized. The rapid expansion of the Hispanic demographic, accounting for over half of all U.S. population growth in recent census cycles, means that minority-focused policies, resources and diversity, equity and inclusion, DEI initiatives, are now divided across a much wider and culturally fragmented landscape. The frontline labor shift. Native-born populations across all races are increasingly pursuing higher education, leaving a structural deficit in hands-on, blue-collar, and logistics labor. The Hispanic demographic, which features a lower median age and a high labor force participation rate, has stepped into these open sectors. For decades, blue-collar municipal and federal jobs served as the primary wealth-building vehicle for the Black middle class. The influx of immigrant and first-generation labor into entry-level markets shifts supply and demand dynamics, often stabilizing or suppressing baseline wages in sectors that do not require formal credentials, making traditional upward mobility paths more competitive. Following executive orders that desegregated the federal civil service, the post office became a haven for Black workers. It offered structured pay scales, union protection, and pensions. The challenge put forward is for HBCUs and legacy civic organizations to recognize that the economic pillars which built the Black middle class, such as stable federal employment via the USPS, are actively fracturing. Rather than watching these shifts unfold as spectators, these institutions have the alumni networks, intellectual capital, and political leverage to intervene. Protecting and reforming the Postal Service ensures that a vital, merit-based, non-discriminatory economic pipeline remains intact for the communities that rely on it most.
Of course, the final thing here is my Joe DeCamara for President 2028. Joe has announced years ago that he was intending at some point to run for president. And I make a pretty good argument that he's probably the exact right choice. And, you know, people think when he was talking about that he was goofing. And I, frankly, listening to him, listening to his brain work, following his history and understanding what he was able to accomplish from where he came, it's kind of a remarkable story. He can't be dismissed for not having the capacity to understand things, even though he didn't learn what a marsupial was. But my argument is, he does represent the thinking that needs to be represented if we're going to have a peer lead us. He didn't grow up as part of that 80% of our wealth that was driven by people who inherited it. He worked for everything this guy's got. And he's capable of understanding the deepest, most complex issues related to democracy, federalism, and how socialism, communism, revenue sharing, collective bargaining agreements, how all of those things work together to make a force that works together for everyone. And with Joe DeCamara as president, he's not going to be thinking about working the edges for personal wealth. He's going to be the perfect example of information guiding power. Because I envision a guy like Joe DeCamara as president would attract doctors of economics to take care of the commerce and the treasury. I would expect him to have true healthcare professionals, people who worked in the system their entire lives with no gap that needs to be bridged. I would imagine that the secretary responsible for our defense, the secretary responsible for our intelligence, and the secretary responsible for our homeland security would be unquestionable in their credentials and competency. Unquestionable.
Twice in 50 years, democracies under pressure have reached past their political class and elevated a professional communicator to executive power. Both times, it worked. So the question is not whether it can happen again. The question is what the fully realized version of that choice looks like. Ronald Reagan spent decades in front of cameras before he governed. Volodymyr Zelensky played a president on television before he became one, then held a nation together with a phone camera and one sentence: "I need ammunition, not a ride." The skill that mattered was narrative clarity, the ability to tell a country what is happening to it in language it trusts, faster than fear can. Consider where that skill is trained. Sports radio. 4 hours of live, unscripted broadcasting, daily, for years. Philadelphia's Joe DeCamara takes hostile calls, manages grief after a collapse, synthesizes salary data in real time, and holds an audience of people who disagree with him and with each other. No cabinet secretary trains at that volume. The model is the one the West Wing dramatized. Intelligence informs power. The leader listens, weighs, and explains. The alternative decides first and manufactures justification afterward. But a communicator needs a subject he has already mastered. Decameras is sitting in plain sight, and it is professional football. Look at how the National Football League is actually built. 32 privately owned franchises and a player market where labor is sold, traded, and priced. That is capitalism, functioning openly. Now the part nobody advertises. The national television money, the league's largest revenue stream, is pooled and split evenly. The smallest market cashes the same broadcast check as the largest. That is socialized risk, adopted deliberately, because the product is the competition itself, and competition dies when only the rich can field a roster. Then the limits. A hard salary cap no owner may spend past, and a floor every team must reach. That is centralized economic control, written into the rule book. The rhetorical shorthand would be communism. The accurate term is central planning, and the distinction matters. The mechanism is a spending rule, not a state. And the players' union, negotiating a collective bargaining agreement that binds all of it. Organized labor, checking ownership at the table. So the most successful entertainment product in American history runs on private capital, socialized revenue, planned limits, and union power simultaneously. Nobody calls it ideological. They call it Sunday. This is not a football anomaly. Hockey runs the same architecture: hard cap, salary floor, revenue sharing from rich markets to fragile ones, free agency, a players' association with its own collective agreement. Two leagues, same mixed design, arrived at independently. Basketball varies the recipe. Private capital and star markets operate inside a soft cap, a ceiling with negotiated exceptions, enforced not by prohibition, but by a luxury tax that makes excess expensive. Add revenue sharing, a draft, and collective bargaining. Different dials, same instrument panel. Baseball is the revealing contrast. No hard cap at all. It rejected that one control after labor wars that cost it a World Series. But look at what it kept. Revenue sharing, a competitive balance tax on the largest payrolls, a draft and reserve structure governing young players, and the strongest union in American sports. A league can refuse one instrument and still depend on the rest. Even the exception is mixed. 4 leagues, 1 truth. Capitalism, socialized risk, central planning, and organized labor coexist in each, because each solves a problem the others cannot. Markets price talent. Shared revenue keeps small markets alive. Caps and taxes stop wealth from ending the contest. Unions keep the bargain honest. None of this makes a league a socialist state. These are structural analogies, not ideologies. The words Americans vote against are names for mechanisms they already trust every weekend. This is DeCamara's actual credential, not celebrity, not trivia. He has spent years reasoning through these systems aloud, live, for callers who arrive angry. He can take a label built to end a debate and turn it back into a question of design. What does the cap do? Who does the tax protect? What did the union win? That translation, from fear back to mechanism, is what American politics has lost. So return to the opening question. The relevant presidential skill was never ideological purity. It is knowing which mechanism belongs where, explaining it without fear, and managing the whole system anyway. Ask who spends every weekday doing exactly that, for a divided audience, live, and keeping the room. He has announced nothing. He is simply on the air in Philadelphia, already practicing the job's hardest part.
When I was the head of marketing for MBT International, we were the importer of a line of effects and studio products that were coming from Germany. And we were importing a pedal that was sold by one of our salespeople to an effects pedal, an overdrive pedal for anyone who, interested in music and understanding guitar stuff. But it was an overdrive pedal, and it went to a dealer in Nashville that one of the session musicians in Nashville, who had just pretty much arrived in the year before, a year or two before, discovered and became the evangelist for. And I bring it up because today, when you turn on the radio and you listen to country music, you're certain to, first of all, hear him play, if you listen long enough. And you're certain to hear a guitar sound by the influence Tom had on all the other session players in town. And he would go on tour at times, and he would play with other guitar players, and there would be more people interested in this particular overdrive pedal because it was unlike anything else. Now, during the time that we were working together, Tom Bukovac and I would have trips to Nashville once in a while for business, and every time I would make the trip, I would contact the musicians, all the session players in town that were using my equipment, and have a nice steak dinner at a nice place downtown. And, folks would come, and the group would expand, and, eventually the tables got bigger. And I think the last time that I did it, one of the guests was Rick Vito. Now, let me ratchet back years before that, when I was in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show, and we were displaying music products there at Brother International when I did the MIDI product. My sales reps and I we were at the Mirage. The Mirage literally had just opened the year or two before that. And we were there, and there was this great lounge in the Mirage Hotel where you could go and sit, and you felt like you were in a Caribbean island somewhere, and you didn't hear casinos, and you didn't see. And it was just very, very different from being in Vegas. And my reps and I, we decided we would sit in this place. And at the table next to us were two women. It appeared to be mother and daughter, and that's how it, as we talked to them, it turned out to be. And they were, the younger woman remarkably just looked like Vanna White. I mean, young Vanna White, 23 years ago. And it just so happened that she and her mother were actually booked, like in Tampa or someplace, for an event where she was going to be Vanna White for the weekend at some trade show or convention or something. But Mom and she, as things fell together, they just started getting kind of uncomfortable about it. So they thought they would take a trip to Las Vegas, and just so happened to drop to the Mirage, sit at the bar next to, or sit at the table next to us. And, we're just having casual conversation. It turned out, at the time I was managing knitting machines for Brother, and the young lady's mother, she owned a Brother knitting machine. And, kind of a cycle around. The only reason we were there with a MIDI product for the music industry is because we built this sequencer out of the disk drive, the smart disk drive that we created for the knitting machine. And it ended up becoming $1 million business for the music products industry. So we were there for that reason. And of course, music products, I should know something about music. So some guy comes up and he starts talking to this beautiful blonde young lady, and eventually he tells her he's the guitar player for the Bob Seger band. Now, of course, me and my buddies, or me and my sales reps, we're kind of feeling like we got a look after these people here, these two women here and this guy coming in here telling people, hitting on this young girl. And in the whole process, he tells her he's the guitar player for the Bob Seger band. So, of course, I have to say, where are you from? And he says, New Jersey. And I just go off about how everybody knows Bob Seger's from Detroit, and everybody knows Silver Bullet Band's a Detroit band, and everybody knows, and everybody knows, and everybody knows, and everybody knows, and everybody knows. And the guy disappeared. The young ladies felt like somebody was out looking out for them. And Tom Bukovac brings me the guitar player from the Silver Bullet Band, who sits down at the table, at the end of the table, right next to me. And as we're having conversation, I ask, so where are you from? It ain't what you know for sure that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. I'm going to make mistakes. We're all going to. And that's why we need to ratchet back how sure we are about everything that we're so sure about.
Welcome to episode 4 of the Thomas Padlan-Malm Hour. On Monday, when I was getting ready to launch the episode 4 for this week, I had asked AI, one of my AI programs, to go back through all of the programs that we did, go back through all of the transcripts from them, and summarize for me what we were doing and where we were going and how we were heading. And it was really kind of remarkable to me. The things that I had, the premises upon which I stood at times, and how some of the things that I thought I was doing were actually contrary to the total understanding of the examples I was working from. For example, I was criticized for trying to keep such a narrow group to the original conversation, because what Socrates understood was that even average people, if you ask them questions about where they stood and why they were so firmly committed to the things they believed in, you learned that they rarely had much control over how they got there, and after they examine it, might believe something entirely different. And the AI summary of where we went talked about how a voter's audit, the manuscript, has been the thread, and what that, and through the conversation, I asked if it would take me from here using all of the goals that we set on the website, which we'll discuss later in the show, and give me the next 10 weeks. And as we went through the next 10 weeks and we talked about how we might expand this franchise and broaden the conversation, some of the ideas about how to invite people to the show emerged. And, as we've been saying, if I've invited you this personally, it's because you've had something important in my life to contribute that actually brought us here. And you're in a position probably to know people, to understand where I'm coming from, see it from your own perspective, where you live, and help deliver it through people you might want to recruit and hand this over to. In one of the tapings, I make a comment about I'm retired now and I live like my cats. And that's how I want to live. I want to write because that's what I enjoy. Thank you, Mrs. Bromberg, in second grade. I want to maybe visit the country and speak from time to time, because unlike most people, I love to stand up and have conversations with people in that agora style. And I would love to have the way we talk about things, not the things we talk about, but how we approach them, to be the thing that we change, and that we understand that what's been happening so far isn't our fault. Tuesday was a special election day here in South Carolina. After voting, my wife and I stopped on the way back to our house. We stopped at the clubhouse in our community. We voted, we saw the food truck, we stopped, we ordered food, we got a cocktail. We sat down out here for a while, then we took our food inside where it was air conditioned, and we ate there at the place in the lobby where we could. Then we decided to have another cocktail and play some pool at the inside the amenity center. And after that, we just came out here and we sat for a while and talked. When I got out of high school, I was my class's most likely to succeed. And my ambition was to, have a house by the lake, own a sailboat, drive a sports car, and, have a pool and all the amenities I could love. And well, I live here 7 minutes from the rifle range where I like to shoot, and I'm a member, kind of an exclusive 1,000-member only organization. I'm living here by the pool in a home that's as comfortable as a home should be. And I did it based on a middle-class average income after having 10 years or so at the highest 2% of all income earners in America, and building a safety net for myself through Social Security, knowing that regardless of how much I contribute to Social Security forever, after those 10 years, I will always earn at the highest Social Security that they will give, and there will be cost of living increases, and I will have a reasonable ability to live the way I imagined I would live when I got out of school with my ambitions. I was telling her about my friend Dennis, and I've talked about him a couple of times in stories, and about how when he was thinking about getting into a lawn maintenance franchise company, he took me with him when he drove up to talk with a guy he thought about being partners with, who lived in this really nice, massive space out in Landenberg, which was the last post office where I worked before I transferred to South Carolina. It was beautiful, rolling hills, and, two kids out in the yard having a big old time with baseballs, hitting them as far as they want to go, and detached garage with a workshop and the whole thing, and, just everything you can imagine, all the motorcycles you could hope for. And as we're driving home, he was talking about how, that was really the life, and that's kind of the goal. But I've achieved everything I wanted to, because my whole life, that earning and making tons of money wasn't the first focus. My first focus was trying to do things as excellently and as well as I could. I learned early on that I saw things differently than most people did most times. I didn't understand it. But now I do a lot more clearly. And from that, I'm able to understand who I need to be talking to and how, and understanding how weak I am in trying to reach places where it's best if I ask others to help me.